Thank you, Louis. Our panelists, please come up. And not to lose a second, let me start talking. So equity is critical, but without a system-wide capability to improve, so a capacity for change, we'll be stuck as we try to implement new academic standards, take advantage of an equity-based funding formula, and use a new accountability system and multiple measures to improve. So we want to take this short time we have together, and we have a panel rich in expertise and insights, and talk about what it takes to create this capacity that we need to underlying the improvements that we want to make. And going down, let me quick introduction. Daniel Allen, Assistant Superintendent of Santa Ana Unified. Mike Kirst, let me see if I ever know who you are. The President of a State Board of Education, of course. Derek Mitchell, CEO of Partners in School Innovation, a nonprofit that works with districts and schools on transformational change. Shannon Brown, Executive Director of San Juan Teachers Association, one of the more innovative unions in our state. And Brooks Allen, Liaison and Legal Counsel for the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence. So by capacity, these factors include adequate financial and other resources, staffing, training, data, student social and emotional support, parental and community partnerships, and coordinated leadership at the state, district, and county level so that improvement can happen. So what I thought we'd do is take 2 or 3 minutes, each of you, to talk about what resonated to you out of the Getting Down to Facts findings that relate or that would be a priority in your mind for action with regard to building capacity. And Mike, why don't you start? I'm not sure, this may be your penultimate public appearance before the next month's final state board meeting, but why don't you start and frame, if you will.
Okay, I find capacity too big to talk about in all its dimensions, so I'm going to focus on the Getting Down to Facts report, which repeats many others, about our very low scores in mathematics and the huge achievement gap in mathematics. We're doing worse in mathematics than we're doing in English language arts, and so let's take a look at that in terms of what would we do about building capacity in that area of mathematics, and let's try and think big. So if you look at it, of course, as you know, the new Common Core mathematics is a very fundamental shift and deep shift in what teachers must know and be able to do to deliver effective instruction and stimulate their students to have that. So it's a deep instructional change. And the question is, how do you build capacity for deep instructional change? Now, if we step back, and I did some back-of-the-envelope calculations with some friends, I figured out that roughly there's between 100,000 and 125,000 teachers in California that teach math. So if you figure that that's somewhere in the ballpark of where you need to go, let's do a thought experiment of how you might get there to do that. I don't have all the answers, but you need some kind of massive professional development program for teachers and leaders. It's just would be absolutely huge in terms of the numbers that we have to do. I'll take some quotes reading from some of the Susan Moffett et al. Paper about it. For example, this is a state regional leader. There are so many resources out there around any given topic, and they're not curated. They're not organized. They're not bundled and pulled together. So that's one problem. Second quote. You first have to have a vision of what excellent mathematics instruction means. It's just amazing how far away people are from that, even a vision of what it is. So you take those problems, and let's say conservatively, you have 100,000 people. that you need to deal with, what do? I think we need to think about that kind of thing. Now, that would get me into what we did with finance with the first Getting Down to Facts report. Remember, the finance paper that Goodwin Liu and Alan Burson and I wrote had this title, Getting Beyond Getting Down to Facts. So the issue is, how do you get beyond? And we actually worked out some principles, but then we simulated the results for school districts. So what I think we need is bring in the engineers. We've had the academics. Now we need the engineers to say, how would you get beyond getting down to facts? How would you actually lay out this massive problem and then solve it in some way with a massive, deep, enduring professional development and capacity building program in mathematics? Now, the two good news things that would help you do this are, one, the Getting Down to Facts study shows that our local educators have bought into our standards. We're not fighting No Child Left Behind. They support it. They think they're getting some help to teach it, but not, I think, nearly enough. So that's a good point that we have there. Finally, is we're going to get around in the 2019 budget, to what I've been talking about for too long, and I won't be around to see it happen, but we have $130 million in state set-asides in ESSA. State set-asides. $120 million alone in Title I, Title II, we have some in various administrative pots. So you could take, if we had the guts, you could take that set-aside money and devote a huge chunk to, let's just say, mathematics. 30 million, I'll pick a number out. Or we can go the other way and just turn it over to school districts in small allotments and give it back to them as general aid. So will we have the guts to do it? So I don't have it all completely figured out, but I think this is the way we need to this is the way we need to think, and this is the way we need to plan, and I think there are resources here that we could do it with. And so all it takes is for the successors to have the political will and the engineering skills to pull this off.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's a good idea. I mean, the idea of focusing on math is a good idea for us to do. But and I want to go there. But before, if any of the panelists have something else that resonated with them, I mean, Daniel, from perspective of a assistant superintendent with a lot on your plate in a big district, what jumped out at you from the?
Yeah, thank you. Just to give a little context, Santa Ana Unified, we're just southeast of Anaheim. I tell people we're about 6 minutes from Disneyland. Almost 50,000 students, 96% of them identify as Hispanic, and a similar percentage fall within our either foster youth, socioeconomically disadvantaged, or English learners in our district. So we've been a big winner from LCFF. And I think that we've been a big fan of that shift, and it's certainly helped us as a school district. I'm a big adherent of the idea when it comes to the gaps in achievement that we talk about. I'm a big adherent to the idea of the instructional core. I think a lot of you are probably familiar with that idea that really the only thing, the primary thing as schools that we're looking at is the quality of the rigor of the academic and cognitive tasks that are being asked of our kids in the classroom, and that's a function of the skill sets of students, the skill sets of our teachers and their preparation, and the quality of our curriculum. And I think that in the context of LCFF, we've gone after, I think, some of the low-hanging fruit first, which is working to acquire and curate high-quality curriculum that's standards aligned. We've been doing that work, and we've adopted math materials, and we supplement those. We have a team. We're able to pay for a team that looks carefully at that curriculum and adds additional pieces where we feel like there's gaps. On the student side, we have the students that we have, and we are deeply committed to the students that we have, whatever level they come to us at, whatever experiences, with all the assets that all of our kids bring to the table, we're there to work with them. And so I feel like the big variable that was also mentioned is this idea of the teacher capacity. and how are we investing in teacher capacity systematically. And I think that educators often go to professional development first. It's the solution to every problem, is professional development, and that's really problematic in the sense that there's a lot of we know a lot about professional development, what works and what doesn't work, and what works is tends to be expensive. A lot of our collective bargaining agreements are not, for example, in Santa Ana Unified, we don't have a ton of collaboration and professional development time. It's one of those ironies because both our association and our administration want it. So it's not a matter of not being committed to it. It's just kind of finding the ways to do that. One of the big things, we've been part of the Core Districts Network that's been focusing specifically on math instruction and math performance. And I think what's interesting about that work is really looking at teachers and teams of teachers as the specialists and working together as a team to figure out how do we improve on the practice that we already have. The other piece that we've been developing with the core is this question of the data systems. There's a lot of experience in this room. I've been at it for a while myself too, and one of the things that I find really interesting is that we continue to make this assumption that our teachers are data experts, that we just need to show them how to log into a system, and we're going to expect them to log into the system and understand how to search on the fields and understand how to manipulate and utilize that data and gather the insights. I think we all, being data driven is kind of a buzz term in education, but most. Well, I don't know if most, but many executives, they look at data, they interpret data. I'm not sure they're always the ones that are curating the data, that are putting the slides together. And we ask our teachers and expect our teachers to do both on a daily basis. And so I think that how do we build a data system that is really not just user-friendly for our teachers, but intuitive and really speaks to the information that we need to make day-to-day instructional decisions is really critical. And the core network has also been looking at different data pieces and data systems to try to give that. I also, just final thought, really thinking about these other the student as part of that instructional core, the other supports that have to be in place in order for our students to have access to our curriculum and to our system. We've invested quite a bit in wellness centers where we bring resources together, working with communities, big investments in early education with different partners, and really thinking about ways with community workers, with additional support, social, emotional, mental health coordinators, all these different pieces that need to be in place so that our students can have access to the curriculum and to the resources that we're trying to provide them in the classroom, and to stop making the assumption that one teacher can manage all of these different variables in an effective manner on a day-to-day basis.
Oh, great. Thank you. Derek, Daniel mentioned data. May be one of the things that you find when you work with districts, but what would help you in your work with districts to build capacity, seeing what their needs are that you then find is difficult as a provider to help with that capacity?
I guess part of what I'm struggling with is the sense that we're sort of fighting a retreating action. Californians don't love their kids, 50% less than New York. Why are we investing in them 50% less? It just doesn't make sense to me. The expectations are just as high. With the fourth largest economy, you would think that we would be able to invest in the kind of outcomes we're expecting. And the schools where we work in, we only work in schools that are 75% or more kids who are living with the challenge of poverty and kids of color. And those are the places that tend to have the least in terms of resources to deliver for families and kids, teachers who are sticking around long enough to generate mastery in their craft, leaders who are similarly sticking around and well-trained and supported for the work. So part of what we do is shore up those structures. And I'm struck by all the learning from this report and the various others that led to it. It seems we're really good at reports, but we're not good at the engineering that we need to make learnings from these reports actionable on the ground inside our systems. And I frankly worry that it's a reflection of our values, that we really don't value these kids. And because we don't, we won't make the necessary investment for them to be successful. And so for me, the thing that will make it work is if we commit ourselves to the investments that we need for these students to meet the goals we've set. And the report actually gave us a rough dollar figure, right? 38% more than what we currently spend. Let's make that happen.
So Shannon, talking about value, do we value teachers? And the report deals with both. Several reports deal with teachers, teaching practice and also retainment and other recruitment issues. And so when you, perhaps even looking through a framework of math, because we have a shortage of STEM teachers, what conclusions do you draw from getting down to the facts?
Since I have you here for the next 3 hours, I'm going to lay it out really clearly for you.
2 minutes, sorry.
Okay, you'll get the abbreviated version. I think there are 3 things, but I'm going to spend most of my time talking about the third one. Salary matters. Salary does matter. That's not just from a union perspective. Now you have researchers saying it. Salary does matter. Working conditions matters. One of the things, as someone who's worked in a Title I school for 12 years, I probably on my 3rd year of teaching was veteran staff. The working conditions in our hard-to-staff schools burn people out. One of the things that I understand is a growing area of research is not only ACEs, but the adverse childhood experiences, but the impact on the adults who support students who have ACEs. There is a secondary trauma that occurs that we have to pay attention to. The third thing that I'm going to spend most of my minute and 30 seconds talking about is about capacity building. So my definition of capacity is a teacher's ability to use evidence of student learning to inform their next steps. So how do we do that? It is not by going to more training. It is by having a highly trained professional, which can be an administrator or a colleague, sit with you and look at evidence of student learning and not tell you what to do, but to ask you meaningful questions to help you as a professional refine your ability to act on that evidence. Because in the end, that is what has to happen when no one else is around. Because collaboration is important, it helps us add to our skill set, but what people do in front of students, they do on their own, right? So how does that happen? So one of the biggest areas that I think we actually need additional research in is what does a system do to support systemic capacity building? And there are massive gaps in systems, which is why there's uneven implementation around evaluation. You can't leave that to one person to supervise because it is far too important. It's expensive to do it right. Yet we have conference after conference talking about the quality of instruction being one of the most important determinants. So let's get committed. In one of the papers, we read about San Juan, San Jose, Poway, to name a few, about districts who are on the right path. So here's one of a couple of things they have in common. One, high labor management collaboration. We co-created, co-implemented, and now co-govern evaluation and PAR. So what happens with that is that if one person goes off that co-governance team, we haven't lost the capacity. That whole team is now watching over that. The second thing, we never lose focus. It is not going to get distracted by the next initiative. And the third piece, our commitment when we brought in a brand new evaluation system several years ago was that we would do as good as we expect teachers. We would continue to bring in feedback and evidence of how it was going, so we would continue to improve our system to make sure it was meaningful to the people that it was meant to be, that it was improving and deepening practice. So we negotiated that language in 2015-16. In 16-17, we had 11 pages of changes, and then this last round of negotiations, we had 30 pages of changes. We are committed to supporting our teachers in being the best that they can be, but that is about capacity building in the entire system to design systems to support each person individually to be the best they can be for kids.
Thank you. Brooks, the collaborative is a small agency. And where does that fit in this larger system of support, and what reasonably can we expect the collaborative to do? Or address something else if you want.
Well, I see, as a panel, I just thought we have 15 minutes total. So, building on Shannon's point. So I think, and I'd speak some on behalf of some CCA colleagues here in the crowd, Josh Daniels, who's there, Tom Armolino, who's the new Executive Director of the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence. And really, one of the great things about coming at the end of this panel, as well as the equity panel before, is being able to kind of take those pieces and say amen. And say, part of what the CC is trying to tackle right now, fundamentally, is looking at, when you talk about what capacity building is, and we talk about what the educational goals are, come in and say, first of all, what are those educational goals? Are we trying to improve life outcomes for all of our children, right? Is that our writ large goal? How does the system do that? And yes, how does the CC, as a small organization, work with the partners across the state to do that? And I think fundamentally, this can't be a siloed effort, and it has to be one that builds on one of my favorite quotes. I was going to say my favorite, but Mike has many great quotes. When Mike talks about patience, persistence, and humility, when we talk about what it means to tackle both systems improvement, when it talks about implementation of local control funding formula, if it talks about just what we are doing literally at a site level, a district level, a county level, state level, to Shannon's points about we have to actually have a system that makes it possible, incentivizes being able to recruit fantastic, talented, committed people, empowering them to actually stay, whether that's in the classroom, whether it's at a site level, whether it's a district level, whether it's a county level, state level. This is fundamentally, and this is where I'm going to borrow Tom's words, it's about relationships. I mean, one of the great things when I look around this room today and we talk about these conversations is there's a lot of relationships in this room, right? A lot of the great successes that have come from the past 8 years, 12 years, 20 years, oftentimes have come from the trust that's built on long-term relationships and a core of understanding that can be built. You can't build that and have success on behalf of kids unless you have the same foundations possible at a local level, right? So that means both building the foundations for a lot of kids who come to school and don't have that stability in their own lives, day in and day out. And that means ultimately for the staff, it means for the principal, it means for the district staff, it means for the board, being able to build that continuity. And so how, as a state system, to take this back to the CC, can you have the collaborative, the California Department of Education, the state board, the county offices, all of the different actors who operate at a state agency level as well as a more regional level, how can there be that continuity of relationships there to build that capacity with the similar shared goals so you can work with everyone who's doing the real work in the classrooms and at the sites to ensure that we reach those goals? And that is an ongoing conversation, right? It's one that ultimately we talk about what the resources are. But I think this is where I keep going back to Mike's words. If we can continue, as we hope everyone does at every level, to be persistent with urgency, right? Patient, and understand this takes some time to really succeed, and all of us collectively keep an eye on that, and then have that humility. So that is where we understand that we can keep coming back every time and realize we're not going to always get it right. We're certainly not going to get it right the first time usually. But if we have a shared, common, trusting relationship with that shared goal, we can get there, but we have to make sure that we stay true to those principles as we do so.
Let's explore a couple other things. So we talked about the need, the Getting Down to Facts talked about the need to get qualified, trained teachers in the schools that need it most. So, Shannon, I'll let you start off. So, suppose that doesn't happen in a district. Is this a state role? Anyone can answer. I mean, how do we ensure that this happens if it doesn't happen at a district level?
Okay, with all humility, I think
Sure.
that might be the wrong question because one of the problems is this is already happening across the state and country. So whose responsibility is it? And I would say one of the things we're not doing is listening to why people are not staying. So rather than trying to figure out how to force people to go to schools, we have to figure out how to keep people at schools and support them in their capacity building. So until we can engage in that conversation, I feel like we're going to continue to have the dialogue around what can we do. Is it a district decision or a state decision about how to force people to take those jobs? And in the end, that doesn't help attracting people to the profession. So if we focus on retention, which is where I believe, according to Getting Down to Facts, is one of our biggest areas of struggle. And I would even, with a minor segue, in special education, and I don't think this is unique to San Juan, we actually have plenty of people who have special education credentials within our district. The problem is they don't want to stay in special education because the workload is crushing them. So this is another example of how do we figure out how to deal with what is really the root cause that is showing these things rather than treating symptoms, and I think that we might be able to move this ball.
I think we're back to that retreating action, right? I think it's true that the conditions on the ground in these challenging schools can actually be shifted in ways that help teachers feel vested, respected, appreciated, supported, and when they feel those things, they stay. Our work shows it, the report suggests it, and I think that's really critical. But in addition to that, they need a living wage. These are people with families, with expenses. They need to make enough money to be able to do the job. And so as we put those systems in place that enable them to feel supported, if they could get $5,000 more working 5 miles closer to where they live, I mean, it would be malpractice on their family for them not to take that, right? So we have to solve both the problems of the conditions that's on the ground and the fact that they really do need a powerful living wage in order to stay in this work. And let's professionalize the practice, because that's the way we can make ourselves happy, providing them with a living wage, right?
So we have successful networks, and CORE is one, but how do we, there are 1,000 districts, how do we get networks out to more districts and actually provide the guidance? Perhaps they need to have that network work. Mike, do you have any thoughts about that?
I think that we, again, don't have the engineering and the knowledge to really take advantage of these networks. I mean, coaches were all the rage, and then that faded, and they're still out there, but now it's networks, and it really makes sense. It has a surface validity, so do coaches. But I don't know much about how the networks are working. What we're spending a lot of time on is creating a lot of networks. CCE, how many did they create? 50, yeah, there's 50, and there's another bunch around. But when I keep going back to, the numbers are huge. If 100,000 mathematics teachers, how many teachers are really getting anything in depth from these networks? Other than we had a nice time networking and we felt good. So I know very little about how these networks are operating, very little about how to make them effective. And so we got to the research has to get deeper, and it has to have more of an engineering focus.
Would data help? Additional data? I mean, we don't have the data to know which teacher preparatory programs are actually producing students that are effective in the classroom for Common Core. I mean, and there may be other things, Daniel, that you see every day that your teachers need or you need as a district. Can you give an example, and is data something we should be focusing on?
Well, I think that the data is a tool that can be used effectively. But part of my concern is that the data, the networks, the coaches, they're all being layered on top of a base program that we recognize as schools, which actually creates little space to build capacity in the teaching force that is working directly with kids. You can do things on the edges. I think that, but outside of a teacher's actual time, I'll give you an example in our school district. Our collective bargaining agreement, basically we have the teacher from the time the bell rings till the time the school day is end. It's linked to the instructional minutes that are part of Ed Code. And so outside of that, teachers have a preparation period We know how these structures work. I think to be able to do meaningful, thoughtful data work, to use the systems that we have, to have teacher leaders really driving these conversations with their colleagues, they need the resources of time and space to do that type of work. They're just not part of our base program as schools. And so a lot of times when we bring in more funding, we do it to bring in additional people, but sometimes they stay outside of that kind of core thing that we recognize as a school. They're not able to penetrate in meaningful ways all the time. And so I think that for us to start thinking and to look at some of the benchmarking that's being done internationally with what other systems are doing around the world, for example, that have moved into higher levels of performance, I think they're thinking differently about some of these core roles that we have to have in our schools, and the time that our teachers as professionals have to deepen their learning, to have those type of opportunities. So
the adequacy study pointed out, as we said, 38% more and $25.6 billion. That's unlikely next year. And so if we look at it as incremental to build, what would the first steps be? Would it be early education? Would it be perhaps more time for teachers to collaborate? There's 10 days that are built into this study. Would it be regional costs, Mike, that was left out of the original formula, which is now included in that adequacy study? Give a sense, each of you, as to where you would put the priorities.
If I were a gazillionaire, I'd absolutely go with early childhood. The best chance for a great finish is a great start. That's clear. And it would be an amazing boon to all our schools to have students coming better prepared to learn.
I'll just jump in, and that would be where I would put it as well, in early education. We've been really focusing as a school district on creating more seats, expanding our programs. We know, for example, when we assess our incoming kindergartners, 63% of them are already in the intensive category in terms of the supports they need. And by our own research, we know if we deliver a core academic program top-notch, that we could still only predict that a third of those students would get to grade level by the time they reach third grade. Which means if we do everything right, we're still moving from the back of the pack. And so if we're really going to talk about bridging that achievement gap and the opportunity gap, I think that really thinking about an actual system of early education in California. I was in an excellent session earlier today talking about how we're not even sure we could call it a system yet. There's a lot of different programs in different ways, but how do we have a coordinated real efforts to make sure that when we get students from the very get-go, that we're not already working from behind.
Shannon? Yes. Brooks? No?
I'm going to make mine very short and pass the time to Shannon. I would just urge that no matter where we look at it, and I would say early childhood, for many of the reasons articulated, makes a lot of sense for investment as well as across K-12, and think about the entire spectrum earlier in the early childhood, that we do so and remember, because I feel like this sometimes gets lost in the headlines coming out of these studies. When we talk about reinvesting, putting new money, we stay true to the principles of LCFF and the equity principles. It's not just more money and layer that on, and that just pour more money into the base, for instance, that we really stay true to that. And if we're talking about early childhood, we actually have that funding driven by where the need is, and focus those resources and maximize the resources and not just subsidize those who already are able to pay for that. And I'd say that's true on the early childhood side as well, K-12. So no matter how we do it, I would just stay true to the LCFF equity principle.
I very much agree with Brooks. I would split it, whatever amount of money we're talking about, because we have to get started with ECE, but we also have students in schools today that need more support than they're getting right now. And I'm going to add just one thing, Mike, to your comment around, we have the researchers, now bring on the engineers, and I would like to offer you for your consideration that practitioners in schools should be the engineers that are helping us design systems, because they can bring a lot to the conversation.
Mike, I'll give you the final word.
Well, I would just say attracting and retaining quality teachers, which I think has been a theme here, And if you think teacher training has problems in K-12, and it does, but it's improved a lot under CTC, take a look at how we prepare teachers in early childhood. It's a grab bag of courses and a certificate from a community college. Look at those, how many people have really looked deeply at that? So before I put a lot of money into early childhood, I'd like to be much more assured that the current preparation programs are going to turn out these super teachers that we're all expecting in early childhood.
Terrific panel. Thank you.
Good to see you again. Yeah, right, yeah.